After a year and a half of all-out war, how is Ukraine holding up against Russia? U.S. officials have been painting a promising picture as they announce plans to send another $1 billion worth of aid to the country 4 months into her latest push against Vladimir Putin's troops.
We've seen good progress in the counteroffensive, which is very heartening. We want to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs not only to succeed in the counteroffensive, but has what it needs for the long term.
But even with the extra support, how strong are Ukraine's prospects really? To discuss, I'm joined by Carol Savietz, a senior advisor for MIT's Security Studies program and a research associate at Harvard's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies and the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. Carol, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So give us your sort of high-level assessment. How is the Ukrainian counteroffensive going? We're hearing everything from disastrously to very well.
Well, I don't think it's disastrously, but I don't think it's blooming and wonderful either. I think that from what I've been reading, and you're probably reading the same things that I am, I think that the Ukrainians are making a modicum of progress in the south, in the Zaporizhia region, and apparently they've broken through at some points in Russian defenses, and the issue is to try to cut the supply lines down from Crimea. The Russians, meantime, seem to have made incremental progress in the north around Bakhmut, and there's still very intensive fighting around there. So it's kind of hard to judge. One of my colleagues yesterday used the phrase a balance of attrition, and I kind of like that. I mean, I think we're in this for a long haul, regardless of how much more aid we give them and regardless of Putin's trip or Kim Jong-un's trip to Russia and getting more artillery shells and things like that.
This really does seem more like something out of the First World War.
Yes.
I
know, I totally agree, and that's the analogy that most people are using, except that it's a First World War with drones and all kinds of other equipment, of course, obviously didn't exist in, the early 1900s.
So in the First World War, what we saw is a battle of attrition until essentially German collapse in late 1918, right? So what we say is warfare tends to be at stable until it isn't.
Right.
Are the Ukrainians planning on the prospect that if they're able to sever Russian supply lines, they might be able to trigger something like that? Or is the assumption that this is just going to go on?
I think there are several factors involved. One is how quickly the Ukrainian army can assimilate all the new technology and equipment that we in the West are giving them. I don't know at what point Putin will cry uncle. I'm not sure we know what that point is. A lot of us are speculating that if Ukraine can push them back to the 2014 lines, after the initial assault on Ukraine, that maybe there would be a chance for negotiation. I read today that some of the Russian soldiers are just deserting and the Russian lines may be collapsing, but I can't prove that at the moment. We just don't know. I would argue that I would think Ukrainian morale is much higher than the Russian morale, and that'll be a big piece because they're defending their home territory. They have aid from civilians, and you hear stories about little old ladies using their smartphones to say when the drones are coming or when the missiles are coming. And Russia doesn't have that support. At the same time, we're hearing about Ukrainian drone attacks in various areas in Russia, basically to bring the war home, to sort of shake up this complacency on the part of the Russian population, and to understand that they, too, could be vulnerable. And I think that's a really important piece of what's going on.
So, assuming Western support for Ukraine stays constant,
right,
it seems like time would be on the Ukrainian side as their forces get stronger and the Russian defense industrial base sort of continues to erode. Is that right?
I don't know. I mean, where do you factor in the fact that the Iranians and Russians are cooperating on drone technology and they are supposedly helping Russia build a drone factory in Tatarstan? How do we factor in, as I alluded to before, this Kim Jong-un trip to Vladivostok? What does that mean? How much material will the North Koreans actually provide to the Russians? Will that be the edge somehow? I mean, we kind of know that they're running out of artillery shells and ammunition, but if North Korea steps up in a big way, how do you call that? I honestly don't have an answer for you.
It says something strange about the world that Russia is now dependent on North Korean supplies as opposed to...
One would think they'd be embarrassed, but obviously there's no embarrassment here.
There has been a change. But I guess the big if in my question was, if Western support stays constant.
Right.
European support has been, I think, more than many of us expected going into the war, and consistently so. And American support has been, but what we're seeing is the sort of parts of the Republican Party seeming to oppose it, although strikingly not Republican voters who are pretty strongly supportive of Ukraine, but some members of the Republican Party leadership seem to be drawing back. Do you assess that as being a real threat to continued American support?
I think ultimately it could be. I mean, we're about to have a showdown over the next year's budget and everything else, and part of the issue, one of the issues is how much aid to provide to Ukraine. I mean, there's this little piece of me that thinks that Putin thinks if he only holds out long enough, Donald Trump will be reelected, and then he has nothing to worry about because Trump has already said he would stop all aid to Ukraine, and Putin therefore wins. That would be a tough shift, but it's also possible.
So, to step away from Ukraine just for a moment, what would that say about America's position in the world to our allies if the United States were to withdraw its support from Ukraine because of a change in administration, or even without, simply because of Republican opposition in Congress without a change in administration?
I don't think the Republican opposition is strong enough yet to sunder all the aid that we're providing to Ukraine. I think that there's a big faction in the Senate, certainly, that wants to continue supporting Ukraine and understands how valuable it is. I think it's the so-called MAGA Republicans in the House who would like to turn it around, but that's sort of in obeisance to Trump and everything else, because Trump keeps talking about how he would do things differently, and once he's elected, the war will be over in a day, but we all know why the war would be over in a day.
So then, zooming back in, I think, the political science on wars is they're either very short or very long.
Right.
And we've clearly passed the very short stage of this
that.
one. Yeah. So then, going forward, what are your expectations for are we going to see World War I style conflict for the next 2 to 3 years in Eastern Europe? That's what the models would tell you.
Right. I think at least through 2024. I hesitate to predict beyond that. I don't see anything at the moment that's enticing either the Ukrainians or the Russians to the negotiating table unless there's something that we can't predict at the moment. I can't see Zelensky suddenly saying, well, okay, we'll compromise now. And, there's this big push on the part of some people to kind of force him to say, okay, we're going to, it's time to negotiate, we're going to stop. And I don't see Putin, because he staked everything on it, wanting to give up at this point. And that's why I said before, I don't know where that line is, where he would cry uncle. I think we learned a lot from the Prigozhin episode also, that there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the way the military has been carried out. But there's also reporting that some of the oligarchs are funneling billions of dollars into the Russian military effort. So the sanctions are working, sort of. And I don't see all of their money flowing into the war effort and everything else. One thing to watch for, is there another round of conscription, and how is that received by the general population? That may tell us something about how long the Russian war effort will continue.
So, we saw this sort of comic opera Russian coup, which, was all and just evaporated with Prigozhin's death now.
Right.
Was that a sign of larger fissures in the Russian state, or was it just, Putin having a feud with his cook?
I don't think it was a coup attempt. I think that's one thing I would correct you on. I think it was an attempt to push out Shoigu, the defense minister, and Gerasimov, the head of the general staff. But I don't think it was a coup against his friend, supposedly, Vladimir Putin. Prigozhin had really been talking truth to power. It was kind of all the last several telegram messages and everything else were basically, the emperor has no clothes, we shouldn't be here, NATO was never going to attack us, Ukraine was not planning to attack us, it's all a sham, and their kids aren't going to war. So I think that made him dangerous to Putin. The fact that Putin waited for the 24 hours or whatever it was, even after they had reached Rostov and moved further, showed that he didn't quite know what to do at first. He was almost like, with a deer in the headlights, is the expression. But so afterwards, people began to say, well, if he was so indecisive, what actually is he doing? And then he waited the 2 months to take down Prigozhin's plane. That's my theory, anyhow.
So this whole affair has sort of put the lie to the theory that was brooded about by some people of Putin, the sort of genius chess player, which doesn't seem to be holding up very well right now. Given that, are we just waiting for events on the battlefield, or do you expect something else to happen, whether it be a Russian escalation, intervention by foreign, further intervention by foreign powers with, greater Chinese support or anything like that? Or are we essentially waiting for the soldiers to have their say?
I think that's a really tough question. I thought you were going to ask me a different question, which is about Putin's fate, to see if something like that would happen. I think the taking down of the plane was a signal to other people who might have had doubts about Putin that he's in charge and don't you dare cross the boss kind of thing. So I think he's allayed the immediate fear of any kind of coup against him. Again, I think the issue is going to be the morale of the soldiers on the battlefield. If they decide that they need more recruits, can they do another massive conscription? And will 200,000 or 300,000 people fled fled Russia a year ago? What's going to happen the next time? And those were the 20 and 30-somethings. Those were sort of the best and the brightest of Russian society. So what does it mean longer term for Russian society and for, ultimately, support for Putin and the kind of regime he's running?
Okay. Carol Savietz, thanks so much for being with us today.